Hi, welcome to another series of UXDX. My name is Catherine and I will be your host for today. Just jumping into a few things about the event and the community that is tuning in globally. The world is full of bad software and bad processes. The mission of UXDX is to bring companies together to help them build an environment that make it impossible to build bad software. And how do we look at that? We look at trying to get people to shift from project-focused thinking to product-focused mindset. Today, if you've got any speaker or any questions for the speakers, please ask them on the right-hand side of your channel. If you're looking at the website, you can ask any questions and we'll collate them and ask the speakers at the end. If you are tuning in on LinkedIn, we will also collate the questions and ask each speaker towards the end of the session. I'm going to jump straight into it. Today, we've got a great lineup of two wonderful speakers. The first speaker of today is Jack Cunningham. Jack is a digital product leader for Livefront. Welcome to the stage, Jack.
Thank you.
Great. Nice to see you. I'm going to hand it over to you. I'm going to ask you a few conversations after this, but you're going to be talking about digital accessibility and strategy and compliance, which is obviously a very hot topic for 2025. So I'm sure there's going to be some really nice insights. So look forward to chatting to you after.
Appreciate it. Well, thank you. Today, we're sitting at a really high stakes crossroad when it comes to both access and strategy. Right now, 15% of the population's neglected and underserved, left feeling unsure, frustrated, yet determined each and every time they want to use one of their devices. We as product and design professionals need to understand that the attempts to close the gap have largely been unsuccessfully tuned to thrive within an actual business environment. So that's what I want to talk about today. And really being here today, you're going to learn some really highly practical ways to address those feelings of your consumers. You're going to leave with an understanding of how to ingrain digital accessibility into your delivery culture. And most importantly, you're going to gain a few new skills that will help you combat those moments in which you feel like the business pressures are encouraging you to maybe just plow ahead without addressing accessibility at all. And really, we want to focus on making access that strategic advantage. My name is Jack Cunningham, and I've always found really great joy in being challenged by new perspectives. And that's exactly what a focus on accessibility has always brought to me in my life and in my career. And I'm really thrilled to be able to share some of those experiences with everyone here today. I serve as the Director of Product Management at Livefront. We're a digital product agency based here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where we partner with organizations to define their digital strategies and then bring those to life by designing and building products and experiences that people absolutely love. So over the next few minutes, we're going to work our way through these three things. Understanding what the accessibility landscape looks like and how it was shaped is really, really important. So we're going to start with really just a brief introduction and picking apart how we created this notion that we refer to as the checkbox mentality, viewing accessibility as a box to tick for compliance purposes. We're also going to talk a little bit about some of the dynamic and frankly threatening shifts that have been taking place over the last several months. That's going to launch us into number two. It's this discussion on that notion of strategy. When you're faced with these pressures to move really fast or even justify why you should build something accessibly at all, how do you best navigate those scenarios in the context of an actual business? And then last, spend some time, really the majority of our time, focused on examples that you can take away today. What is it that you can do to weave accessibility into how you deliver so that it can really become that strategic advantage? So let's first get started with how we got here. When folks talk about accessibility, the conversation often stems from the Americans with Disabilities Act. In 1990, this was a law that was passed that brought about a great deal of physical access to so many people in the U.S. Thinking, about this is really what brought about, ramps into buildings, braille across signs in public places. Life and business was taking place in the physical world, so Congress said, let's ensure that as many folks as possible can actually participate within it. Then, as the internet gained in popularity, this independent international organization introduced the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. With the creation of this new space, albeit a digital one, they felt the need to assert what the ramps and accessibility accommodations rather of the internet ought to look like. This was guidance and suggestions for those who were interested, as more and more life was happening online. That said, the attention this grabbed was really fairly niche at the time. Then a whole bunch of time passes. More and more stuff moves online. And then in 2018, the DOJ says, all of you may have been a little confused about if the ADA applies to you and it applies to digital spaces. Well, here's our answer. It does. We won't say, though, what that looks like or what that feels like, but maybe consider the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines as a good guidepost for you. This sets off a whole flurry of action, some quite positive and some fairly questionable. Lawsuits begin to roll in, aiming at enforcing the ADA and trying to create better access for folks to consume and contribute to the web. However, at the same time, a cottage industry of sorts of cut and paste style lawsuits begins to pop up. And those cut and paste suits bring about a huge burden for small and medium-sized businesses. That's because these firms were filing suits not for the sake of creating access, but oftentimes filed to win a quick buck and settle before actual change has been brought about. But despite this really messy legal landscape, companies did begin to take notice in hiring folks who specialized in ensuring that they could meet the requirements of the law and effectively de-risk their products and their businesses. This is creating that environment where the accessibility checklist would really be born. This risk mitigation tactic was not, fully complete, but it was generally a net positive and created progress for the industry. It was an attempt to care about and deliver products that were accessible. At the same time as these risk mitigation tactics were taking hold, over here, the big consulting firms were in the ears of our executives and coaching executives, sharing this corollary insight that they had recognized. They were noticing a correlation between those companies who were investing in the accessibility practices and noticing that those who were making that investment saw an increase in revenue, often great deal, at times 2x of an increase. That combination of legal action and these corollary insights were really what cemented this deep desire for companies to draft and deploy an accessibility checklist. Finally, that brings us to a shift that's occurred just this year. With a federal push away from DEI and accessibility within the US, large corporations are doubling back and heavily divesting from this work, embracing the fact that this administration has shared their lack of intention to take up ADA cases. Politics completely aside, this is really just a clear display that these firms were not able to make accessibility a strategic advantage to them. It was never more than that checklist or a compliance consideration. It didn't actually permeate their delivery culture. While the checklist approach was not the end-all be-all, these current trends are really now putting those baseline efforts at risk. There's a real and present danger that we're about to take several leaps backward in terms of the accessible progress that has been made. If you can't find ways to make accessibility core to your delivery culture, we're only seeing a regression because you're often measuring the wrong things. So if that's where we've been and we have this understanding of what the checkbox mentality is, we might now be in a better position to discuss this. How do we actually do better? How can we build and design in a way that isn't threatened by having to justify why supporting a screen reader or a device orientation is a good business decision? How do you actually create experiences that support the widest possible audience and make it serve the business? It's quite the challenge. Well, to do this, it starts with accepting that what you have to work with is far from complete. Earlier, we discussed the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, but the question naturally gets raised, should you really be applying those same web guidelines to something like a mobile app or connected TV if that's actually what you're designing and building? The answer is almost certainly not always. Often directly mapping those requirements from the web or even just modality to modality is not even possible. We first need to accept that a single source of truth doesn't exist. There isn't a resource nor a person with all of the answers. Second, we need to be wary of tying discrete accessibility work to an ROI analysis. That can't be your measure. There are at times when you can make assumptions and estimate the impact of increasing the accessibility within like a key flow, maybe like a checkout flow. Those numbers might follow a little bit more easily. However, this creates space for this to be your organization's habit. Asking, well, how many of your users actually need this? Or is the market big enough? Can we justify by maybe going forth without it right now and coming back if people say that they need this to be built accessibly? Those are all the wrong questions. And by accepting ROI as your measure for justification, you're turning a moral concern into a business concern that will keep you from reaping long-term benefits. It'll keep you from harnessing the indirect benefits, those that come from building things accessibly the first time. And that's exactly where the magic is. That is the strategic opportunity, the indirect benefits. So if you can't easily define the requirements and we can't tie it to the bottom line, it gets really difficult. Where do you go from here? What do you do? And the answer is that you have to build this foundation that offers these little nuggets of value along the way and is built into repeated actions. You must model accessibility. We must routinely make people aware of its impact. And we need to insert perspective and reinforcement as much as possible. Great in theory, but what do I mean? Well, when you think about modeling accessibility, modeling it builds this culture where you're thinking about it regularly, leading to more intuitive experiences being created in the very first place. We often see this starting for us with product designers. This involves regularly turning to peer products, just like we would for design inspiration in general, but we want to do so looking for what's good, modeling strong accessibility documentation and finding that in Figma communities and seeing organizations actually pulling it off within their products. And then imposing those same guardrails onto the designs that we're bringing to life to bring about the best work possible. It's also about building awareness, and building awareness builds proactivity rather, to ensure that you aren't signing up to rebuild or refactor things in the future. You're driving efficiencies. So how do we catch things sooner with lightweight tools and allow us to build the right thing the first time? Well, we often rely on things like the Axe dev tool systems and integrating that into CI pipelines to really highlight issues early on so that we're inherently creating more beautifully written code in the first place. And then there's also this notion of perspective seeking. And perspective seeking brings about the discovery of new opportunities for your products, not just for those who rely on assistive tech, but those who do not as well. And then it comes reinforcement. Reinforcement brings about certainty and limits the unknowns, which completely erode roadmaps. For us, this often looks like including our standards for accessibility in PR checklists. So every time code is reviewed, accessibility criteria is part of that conversation between engineers, creating cleaner, stronger, and again, more effective code. All of these items tied together are moral culture builders, really carefully blanketed with things that have the measurable, discrete value. In the near term, we're making stronger decisions. We're identifying those new opportunities and building solutions that are generally more scalable and effective from a code-based perspective. But very few people would look at those things and say, those are accessibility initiatives. Rather, focusing on accessibility is a simple means to achieving those greater ends from a business perspective. What I want to do is actually look at a couple examples. And so the first, taking a step deeper into what do we mean by elevating perspective, one way our team has been able to really elevate perspective and uncover that incremental value for organizations is through usability research. Many folks are aware that you can and should put your products in front of users often, and a lot more people are leaning into the tools that allow this to happen more seamlessly. The lesser known fact is that there are a whole bunch of really wonderful usability research and recruitment tools out there that allow you to put your product and your designs in the hands of people who actually rely on assistive technology and gain insight really, really quickly. This past year, I ran the Chipotle app through this process as a part of a competitive analysis project that we were doing. And so I want to actually share some of the perspective wrapped in here. What we're going to do is we're actually going to look at the screen recording of an interview that we did. And what you're going to hear is that there's a participant that was asked to complete the ordering flow, order a burrito within the Chipotle app. But this participant was completely blind and relied on the native screen reader functionality on her iPhone called VoiceOver, What you're going to see in this video is that there are going to be a bunch of boxes jumping around the screen. That's showing the focus area for her at the moment. What's happening is the device is supposed to read out what is in that black box and allow her to orient herself to the app. When you watch this, you're not going to hear the announcements from the phone, but you will hear her reactions to navigating the experience. I just want you to observe and watch the screen and understand what she may have been experiencing when going through this flow.
So my iOS just updated. I'm actually having trouble doing anything in the app now. It's not letting me sign in. It's not letting me order. It's just not. Okay, hold on. Nope. It's okay. Yeah, it's not. Okay, it's letting me. It's difficult to navigate because there's different parts of the app. Let's see if it's gonna let me do. Okay, it's gonna let me. I don't want to. Okay. I usually don't have an account.
So what did you hear? What did you notice? Where did we lose her? The most obvious, she couldn't complete the task, right? The transaction fell apart. And despite her really wanting to, she couldn't order her burrito. But I think if you take a look at some of the other kind of key observations here, there's a lot of room for opportunity. And in just a few short minutes, you find that opportunity quite quickly. And if we look at this list, you do find value in these quick, oh, here's what we should go invest our time in working on. But I think the bigger benefit here is you get to share this human experience. You hear the frustration and experience of a real user. And that frustration is so easy to share. That perspective is grown within stakeholders when you share this type of recording, because you're not only highlighting these opportunities and ability to remove barriers, but you're creating stories that are told in your users' words, not your own. You're not necessarily advocating for accessibility in this abstract. You're showing here are these human pain points that present a lot of new opportunity for us to go solve for. I really believe that this accessibility-focused UXR is one of the quickest and easiest ways that you could leave here today and actually start pushing the ball forward when it comes to accessibility. The second example I want to hit on in this kind of four-part framework is this notion of reinforcement. So, how is it that we can be really successful in reinforcing accessibility? And I think one of the ways we've seen this come to life is to do so by getting intimately familiar with the platforms that you're building your product on top of. For example, iOS and Android platforms offer up hundreds of these first-party SDKs that you can lean into to deliver high-quality experiences. And this can actually be used as a really strategic advantage when it comes to accessibility. Two of my favorite examples here are iOS's TipKit and App Intents. And today I want to focus on just the iOS framework TipKit. It's a UI framework that has some really great examples of how you can, simply having awareness of this and integrating into your product allows you to advance, the accessible experience for users who rely on assistive tech just as much as those who don't. So if we return to the Chipotle app, we're going to walk through what their menu experience looks and feels like today. It functions a lot like this. You get this browse experience of all the toppings you might want to add to your burrito or your bowl. And when you tap one of those items, this little tooltip pops up, letting you know that you can swipe to customize how much of that ingredient you might want in your bowl or burrito. However, similar to what you saw in that interview, that video, this was a custom-built component that didn't account for that screen reader or even keyboard navigation. It isn't announced to the user so that when they make an interaction, they don't know it's there. They actually don't have the ability to customize what's going into their meal. Now, on the flip side, on the right, you see this representation of TipKit. It's this UI framework that Apple puts out, and it tells a much different story. It allows you to produce that same experience, but far more effectively. You can see a view of that here, and really the question is, well, looks pretty similar. What's so wonderful about this? Well, out of the box, it handles things like dynamic type, automatically scaling up font sizes for folks who bump that up on their device. But that's not it. There's a whole lot of other additional benefits here too. It provides the screen reader support out of the box. it produces this common pattern that's really intuitive to users who rely on assistive tech and just as much as those who do not, because you're experiencing it, you're seeing it in other apps. And it requires far less development time to pull off. All these are incremental gains with benefactors of those, again, who rely on assistive tech. It's also a benefit to those who don't. And it's also a huge benefit to you and your product team, because you don't have to have intimate knowledge of how to make all of those things happen. You're using strong patterns and reinforcement simply by knowing this is available and offered to you on the platform. Ultimately, our goal is to find where you can deploy these kind of step functions, this framework, in small ways, and integrate it really tightly into your weekly delivery motion so that it's occurring throughout your entire development cycle. It's not happening as like one large corporate initiative. And a framework like this is really critical to help you avoid the base just being at the baseline, that checkbox mentality, and actually reaping the indirect benefits of this work by making products accessible and having those bite-sized functions built into your life cycle so you can obtain that strategic benefit without losing momentum if something like the market changes or there is a new administration taking power. When seas are rough or seas are choppy or seas are smooth, having something like this, these small bite-sized bits permeating your delivery culture is really, really the unlock. So what I wanted to highlight here is actually encourage everyone to pull out their phone and scan a QR code and connect with me, because I want this to be a conversation. There's a focus here on really trying to find the bite-sized chunks of work that you can actually build into your delivery cycle, because that's where that unrealized potential is. That's where this becomes a huge strategic advantage. If you connect with me, there's a bunch of resources I'd like to share with folks and help you create more accessible, sustainable, and really high impact products. But ultimately, I'm not the all-knowing expert, because remember, there is not one. No one is. I really love connecting folks to resources. So I think this is a really big place to jump off and start further discussing how do you find those opportunities to build it into your weekly delivery motions. So with that, I know we might have a bit of time here for some discussion, and I can share further examples if people have any questions that they'd like to dive into. Catherine, looks like you might be on mute.
There we go. You think I'd learn at this stage. Thanks, Jack. That was really, really great. Thank you for sharing. From my perspective, it brought a whole broader conversation about accessibility, and big conversations at the moment is about the business value, and they drop accessibility. So I loved how you brought the natural business value of accessibility back into the fold as just an obvious choice. So that was really great. There was a few questions, not just one, so I'll focus on that. There's a few questions around the tech stacks that you use around accessibility. So one in particular was, what platform did you use to record that session? So that would be maybe the voiceover case study.
Yeah, there are several that we lean on. That one in particular, we recruited folks through userinterviews.com and then administered that test on Lookback. We also I have a lot of admiration for the team over at Fable. So they're actually a research recruitment platform purely focused on accessibility. They have a cool part to their business too, where it's like, hey, I have a problem I want to solve and I don't necessarily know how to do it. They'll coach you through it. So a lot of the recruiting platforms are doing a little bit more of that coaching now. We've been doing some on Maze as well, if you want to go more of an unmoderated approach. So lots of really good tools out there. But those are some of the favorites right now.
Yeah, and then another follow-up was accessibility tools in general. Is there anything that you feel is a game changer outside of Maze or user interviews?
I highlighted it briefly, but finding ways to have the implementation checked along the way for accessibility is pretty big. So like when we're doing web projects, we're going to lean on AxDev tools and try to actually pull that into our CI pipeline a lot. I think the other bits is just to acknowledge that when it comes to our designing our UI, do we have those similar checks happening with touch target size definition or color contrast and device orientation happening within your actual design? So our team has relied really heavily on ensuring that we have this base project template that includes voiceover annotation. It includes the reminders to be checking all of your your styles to make sure that they meet compliance. So I think it's taking a look at the entire life cycle and asking, where can I have just this nice, friendly like bumper to continually remind us to be focusing on it. And it's not just, design who carries that torch. It's product, it's engineering, it's QA. And so we find each of those little opportunities to bump into them. So yeah, in the design files, relying on templates to remind you to define those touch target sizes, and so on and so forth. When it comes to QA, we're also doing the same thing there. Or I mentioned kind of the PR checklist. When a PR is posted, ensuring that you're just forcing a conversation. Ultimately, not everyone's going to have a complete understanding of what makes this unique design experience perfectly accessible. But if you're forcing the conversations and then relying on some of that research, it's a good kind of well-rounded blanketed approach.
Amazing. And this is more of a question to follow on from this, and it will lead into another question. But what are the types of questions or problems that around accessibility that people come to you wanting help from? What is is there a common one that people go, yeah, this is it. This is always what they need help with?
I think one of the big challenges comes to like defining what is accessible. So there's generally organizations saying, hey, we want to be, WCAG 2.2 AA compliant. And you can go look and read through what that means, but translating that to the platform you're building on gets really difficult. And then oftentimes if we ship a mobile app, there's also a website coming along as well. You want comparable experiences. How do you approach that? So I think the questions generally asked is philosophically, is this accessible? Because we can't translate those requirements perfectly from platform to platform. And I think one of the solves there, and it's a little bit of gymnastics, is to say, get really familiar with the web content accessibility guidelines, the letter of the quote unquote, the unofficial law, I will say. And then on a mobile experience, what is Apple and Google putting out by way of assistive functions on the actual device? Where do these things map one-to-one? Or where is maybe one function on your iOS device mapping to 5 different criteria on the web content accessibility guidelines? So I think the question more succinctly that's asked is like, how do we translate the web content accessibility guidelines to the platform we're building on? And it comes from being intimately familiar with the platform side of things.
Great. And another question from a small company, doesn't say the size, but they have not he, she, or they are a sole UX person on the team. How the accessibility has fallen under her. Is there a size that would warrant having an accessibility expert within the UX team or outside of it?
It's a good question. I'm not sure I have a strongly held belief on, you hit a size of an organization, you'd have someone very much focused on accessibility. Again, I think that the way to be successful within a business environment is oftentimes to defer that when possible, and have it just be, a torch held by so many. And do regular audits with someone who is maybe that expert. I think the benefit of having that torch held by so many and finding ways for it to just be naturally rolled into what you're doing from a delivery standpoint is that you're not having to say like, this is a company-wide corporate initiative, because that's what oftentimes gets pulled into like the really difficult business decisions of maybe times are tough and we need to find a way to scale back. Like it's going to be the first thing that's cut, and it shouldn't be. But business pressures will encourage you not to focus on accessibility for so many reasons. And so I actually think there's great value in trying to encourage each individual to hold a small piece of that pie together, because it's less susceptible to business drama. And as a sole individual in a UX standpoint, there are a bunch of really great resources out there within the Figma community. And CBS has like a really great mobile annotation library that you can go look up. And they're just really great ways to pull it in softly and naturally into the work that you're already doing to advocate for the pieces of the journey and experience that you have control and shape over.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. I think that was the whole kind of summarized your talk incredibly well too, is that it should be naturally incorporated into the pieces rather than it being a forced piece. Jack, that was really lovely. Thank you. It was very clear. I loved the flow of it and all the advice in the middle of it, as well as the case study. So thank you very much for that. For anyone who wants to share Jack's talk, you can do so. It'll be on our website, but it'll also be on LinkedIn, and it'll be available on the website after this as well for you to watch time and time again. So if you want to check back on those resources, and add Jack to LinkedIn as well, as he mentioned. Thanks, Jack. I'll talk to you again, and thank you very much.
Appreciate you. Bye.
Bye. Now, up next, we have Karolina. So Karolina is a UX engineer for Nokia, and Karolina will talk about UX of code, so leveraging UX principles for better coding. Welcome to the stage, Karolina.
Hi, hello, everyone.
Hi. So I'm going to add you to this. The questions will come up towards the end, so I don't really have anything to talk about because I'm intrigued to hear about this. We always love a good engineer UX style of content. So looking forward to talking to you at the end, and bye for now.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me in UXDX online series. It's a great pleasure to show something from the field of my expertise, because today we are going to take a look at the code from another side, because code is the backbone of every software, every website, every app. But what about the coding experience? What about the developer experience? So today we are going to check if we can utilize UX principles to make coding a better experience. And onto the agenda. First, we are going to start with a quick refresher on what user experience design is, because we need to set a common ground for our further discussion. Then we will check how we can apply Gestalt principles and Newton heuristics, the two most common sets of principles, onto the code to make it more readable. And then we will move to a practical application of the things we have heard to the code. So first, let's start with some numbers. 88%. Well, that's a huge number, isn't it? 88% of users are less likely to return to a site after a bad user experience. And yet, sometimes we are still forcing developers to experience poorly written code. This sounds like a really bad user experience, really frustrating thing. So we are going to talk about UX of code, but as I said previously, we need to set a common ground. So first, we are going to talk a little bit more on UX itself. UX is commonly stated with word user interface. UI. This is how we should pronounce it. And we need to know what UX and what UI is. We need to distinguish these two fields. So let's start with UI. We often speak of UI when we mean something related to color theory, to typography, to how things animate, and how the visual look and feel of the interface is. And we talk about user experience when we mean the real experience of the product. And often during the design process, we conduct usability tests, we talked with users, sometimes we prepare information architecture. And to prove this point even more, I have prepared a really reliable example of a ketchup. And yes, this is the UI of the ketchup bottle. So we have this little lid on the top and the stable bottom on the bottom of the table. And the experience of this bottle is as follows. So it's quite hard to get the ketchup out because it is on the bottom of the bottle. So we need to flip the bottle upside down and try to get this ketchup out of it. But what if we change the UI a little bit? So now we have lid on the bottom of the bottle, so it basically stands on the lid all the time, so the ketchup flows down, and it's much easier to get the ketchup out, so we can enjoy our hot dog with ketchup. So this is our common ground, and now we know that UX focuses on the experience. UI focuses on the visual aspects. And we also know that UI may influence UX and vice versa. But what does it have to do with programming even? So now we are going to check the UX of code, because the code is a user interface itself. So let's now imagine following example. This is your first day at work and you've received the task. You need to refactor some part of code, and this is the code you see. Your first thought is, oh, who wrote that? You don't want to work with this. But after a short time, you need to read what does it mean. And you spend some time and you see, okay, this function is called some stuff. This function returns an error in some conditions. And you can see that there is a 3.14. It probably refers to circle. It may calculate some circle properties or something. So after a while, you will manage to get the meaning of the code. But is this the same situation if everything is on fire, the deadlines are coming, and manager is staring at you because you need to know what this code means and time is passing by? It is not. So we need to fix that code so you can see what does it mean at one glance. And here UX principles come. So UX principles are designed to make sure that the final design meets the needs of the user while providing smooth user experience. And as mentioned in the agenda, this presentation will cover two sets of UX principles. The first one is Gestalt principles, and the second one is Nielsen heuristics for usability. Let's start with the first one. So Gestalt is the word borrowed from German, which means form or shape, and it refers that we perceive parts of something like a whole thing, so an organized whole that is made of some parts. And to give you an example of this occurrence, I'm sure that your brain has filled in all the gaps. So this is how Gestalt principle works. And we have a lot of Gestalt principles, but we are not going to cover all of them. I have chosen 4 of them because I think that these 4 are the most significant when it comes to coding. So let's start with the law of similarity. It says that we humans tend to perceive things that are similar as a group. So in this example on the right side, we can clearly see that there is a group of bright dots, and we have another group of dark dots, even though we don't have any white space or any other visual grouping. And when it comes to code, we can approach this law in 2 ways. The first one in this example is that we have 2 groups of variables. The first one refers to a person that has first name, last name, age, and so on. And the second group refers to some kind of proof, so something related to the account of this person. So for example, max login attempts or the role of the user. And these examples, these variables are written in uppercase. So it basically means that these are global variables. So we have local variables related to the person itself and a group of variables related to the account. But we can also apply a different kind of visual grouping, which comes from our IDE, and we can apply some coloring. So we have another groups of words. For example, we have functional words like cons or other marks, and we have a different color for a variable name. We have first name, last name, and so on, colored in white, and another color comes for variable values. So that is basically it. Let's move to another law, the law of proximity. As I've mentioned before, we haven't seen any visual gap. And here we see a visual gap. So it basically says that objects that are near each other are perceived as a group. We have clearly visible group of bright dots and another group of dark dots. And when it comes to coding, we can do the same thing. We can apply some white spaces to indicate that we have group of variables related to a person, group of variables related to cat, group of global variables, and then we have a block for functions. Also remember to feed your cat if you have a cat. Okay, and for the next law, I have a little quiz for you. So what do you see? A, 4 Pac-Man staring at each other, or B, diamond in a front of 4 circles? I'll give you a second to think. And okay, if you have selected option B, I have bad news for you because you are affected by closure law. It says that human tends to fill the blanks to perceive complete objects, even if parts of these objects are missing. So your brain has filled in all the gaps. And in programming, we have these function blocks. What does it mean? It means that for the line number 1, on the end of the end of it, we have this curly brace. And in the line 3, we have another curly brace. So it indicates a visual boundary that says to us that this is a function. And only among these 3 lines, we have this function. And then we have white space and the function call. So hello to our audience. Let's move to another law, the law of pregnance. It says that humans tend to see objects in their simplest form. Here we have the logo of Olympic Games, and human eyes tends to perceive this logo as 5 circles intersecting with each other rather than some lenses, some C-shapes or arcs or whatsoever. And in programming, we can see the application of this law for variable names. And here, for example, we have a very long variable name, which is really hard to read. But if we apply some cases, for example, camel case, Pascal case, snake case, it's much more easier to read when we have some visual separations between the words. All glory to the pregnant law. All right, let's now move to another set of principles. We are going now to cover Nielsen heuristic for usability. And this is the set of 10 general principles for interaction design created by Jakob Nielsen. And these are heuristics because they are really general. They do not specify any specific usability guidelines. And my friend once said that we can apply Nielsen heuristic almost to everything, for example, to a coffee mug. So let's now try to apply these principles to a mug filled with delicious dose of morning coffee, evening tea, or in my example, with a water. So let's start with the first one, user control and freedom. So if you take a look at the mug, it's really easy to use. You can see the handle on the side, you can handle it like this, or you can use it with both hands, any way you want. So it's quite easy to use it the way you want. Then let's move to the visibility of system status. So when I look inside, I can see that I have some droplets of water inside, not too much to not spill anything on the table, but it is easy to tell what is the status of the mug. So I know there's not much water and it's probably safe not to spill everything out. Then much between system and real world. So handle is on the side, top is open so I can see what's inside. And almost every mug in the world looks like this, unless it has a lid to not spill things out. But let's say in general that every mug looks the same. So it's easy to tell how to use the mug because every mug in the world looks the same. And every mug on the world, when you put it on the side, I won't do this on live, it will spit its contents out. So this is for consistency and standards because every mug placed on the side will let the contents out. But to prevent that, as I've done a couple seconds ago, I put my Mac on the table using the stable bottom, so I will avoid spills. Then we have recognition rather than recall. So as mentioned previously, we have this handle on the side. So I know that I can handle this way. So I can travel with this Mac to, I don't know, for example, another kitchen or somewhere else. So it's easy to take this with me anywhere else. And then onto aesthetic in minimalist design. So my Mac has a variation of "this is fine" meme, but in Polish. But this graphic doesn't hinder the Mac's usability. So I still know how to use this Mac, even if it looks like this. And then we have help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors. Hot Mac still can be handled. So from the visibility of system status, I know that the content of the Mac is cold. But let's suppose that the content is hot. So I can still handle hot Mac because it has the handle. I don't need to carry it this way. And on to the last one, help and instructions. If there is any specific method of cleaning, using the Mac, probably some instructions will be given in a form of icon on the bottom or whatsoever. For this particular Mac, I don't have any icon, so I don't know if I can wash it in washing machine, but I will not try to do this. And let's now consider these heuristics in a perspective of code. So let's think about their applicability to code. And I have divided this heuristic into 4 groups. The first one is code structure and formatting. The second, naming and coding conventions. Third, code efficiency. And fourth, help and documentation. Let's jump into the first one, code structure and formatting. Here we have user control and freedom. So we can in our code, we can make it work for the typical task. So if I have a task to add something to the code, it should be easy because the code that is already there should allow me to do that. And also in this point, I have mentioned use comments to explain, which is quite a controversial point for developers because some developers don't like putting comments in code because it makes them longer and so on. But from the usability perspective, I recommend to use comments, even if this is a single liner, so the user of your code will know what this function does. Moving on, aesthetics and minimalist design. So in contradiction to use comments to explain, we have avoid clutter and do not overload code with comments. So don't write documentation in code, don't make it very long. But as I said, single liner is just fine. And onto the example, here we have a class for stack. This is a structure that allows you to put in items on and pop them out. And this is basically what this part of code does. Because we have used clear naming, we know that this is stack because we can read that this is the stack, and we don't need to think too much to get the meaning. And we have functions that will allow us to push, pop, and check if the stack is empty. And we have these little comments in line 4, 9, and 14, just to let the user know that this is the function to push items on the stack or to check if the stack is empty, and that's it. Moving on to another category, naming and coding conventions. Here we have match between system and real world. And as said previously, we have known that the stack is the stack because it was named like that. So please use relevant naming to what the function does. And also refer to the real life. For example, if you are going to have a function that, I don't know, for example, counts numbers, let's call it counter or number counter or whatsoever. And then we have consistency and standards. From my perspective, it is important to use consistent formatting that is specific for given language, but also that is specific to your team. And this is something that you have agreed on, because common things or familiar things are easier to understand for us. So it's good to use consistent formatting that we already know. And then we have recognition rather than recall. So these previous heuristics are basically the proof for this one, because when we use meaningful names, meaningful comments, consistent formatting, it is easier to recognize what this part of code really does. And on to the example, we have a class called simple calculator. And as I said, when we have an object in real life, for example, calculator, it probably has functions like adding numbers, subtracting them, multiplying, and so on. So why don't we just name functions inside this class just like that? We have add function, subtract function, and these little comments that explain what the function does. Onto the third category, code efficiency. We have there visibility of system status. And this is quite easy because we can let others developers know what is the status of our code. So for example, if some functionality is missing, we can let others developers know that, oh, there's a to-do, we need to add something to this function. And that's it. We can also provide progress or debug messages when you write some part of code that is displaying something in a terminal, and provide clear error messages that will again let us recognize rather than recall. Moving on to another, error prevention. And this is all about writing meaningful error messages that should be self-explanatory, and also a bit of preventing them by providing such explanatory messages. So if something breaks, please clearly let other developers know that this breaks because of this and that. And onto flexibility and efficiency of use, we can provide some shortcuts for experienced user, or we can provide code snippets or optimizations that will allow us to write code faster. And onto the example, we have here a mockup function that is called process file. This mockup function processes file, as we know from its name. And here we have this little command in the line number 6 that says, fix me add checks for file extension. So we clearly know that something is missing, and probably what is missing is some if or check for file extension. And we also have console logs in, for example, line 8 that display the status of this function. So we know that at this point of time, this function is reading a file. All right, and on to the last category, help and documentation. We can help users recognize, diagnose, and recover from errors by providing clear messages again, but also by storing logs or writing tests for our code. And also we can have help and documentation, because we can use code comments again, but also we can provide some README files. We can use Confluence to store our documentation. And please remember to keep this documentation up to date, because there's nothing more frustrating than legacy documentation. And onto the example, this is a really simple example of a README file for our file processor, which explains how to install it and how to use it. And onto the best part, we have this practical application. So if you remember, this was the code from the beginning, this some stuff, and we can quickly fix it by applying similarity law. So now we see some color. It's much more easier for the eye. And then we can keep our users informed by providing some meaningful messages. So when our function throws an error, we can say that, please enter valid positive number. So we now know what happened. And then if we have any logs, we can provide an additional messages like names for the variables that we are going to print. And then we can match our code with the real world by providing meaningful names for our functions. So our function is now called calculate circle properties, and our variables are area, circumference, and diameter. And then if we throw errors or if we have any other parts of codes that are similar, we can make them more visible by providing some white spaces around them. So in lines 3, 7, 11, and 17, we have just a white space to make code more readable. And then onto user control and freedom, our function was quite long, so we can divide it into two parts. And the first part is for calculating, and the second is for printing properties. So our developer doesn't have to see everything printed on console if he or she doesn't want to. And on to the last one, we can prevent more errors by using types. So for example, if you are using TypeScript, you can define a type called circle properties, which includes every property of your circle. And that's it. This is our before and after of code. And I think the second one looks much better. I hope so. But after this, you may receive a message saying, Karolina, but your code takes much more space. And that is true. But shorter doesn't always mean better in terms of usability, because sometimes we need to take more space to make things readable. However, always consider your project needs, because maybe you don't want your code to be longer than specified number of lines, and that's fine. You can utilize other principles to make your code better. And there is one thing for potential concerns. I've been asked once, should I change AI generated code formatting? And the answer is, it depends. It depends, because if your team uses a very rigid code structure or something that you have agreed on, I think you should change it. But if this is just for your purpose, you don't use any specific formatting, or this AI generated code shows you some way to improve your own code, I think go for it and keep it like that. Some of the main key takeaways, something to remember. First one is write code for humans, not for the machines, because as we have seen, we are affected by different biases, laws, and so on. Second one, provide clear messages, especially error messages, because it's easier to recognize rather than recall what is going in your code. And the third one, embrace documentation and keep it up to date so everyone can refer to it. And that is all for key messages. And that is all from my side. So thank you so much. And I would like to connect with all of you. And I'm open to questions if you have any, and if we have any time left.
Thank you, Karolina. That was great. Yeah, please add Karolina to LinkedIn there. If you've got, there's been a few questions, but maybe you can reach out to Karolina directly if your question wasn't asked, because we were a little bit tight on time. Interesting question. Someone asked on your team structure and the ratio that you work with.
Okay, so my team is consisting of 4 separate teams, and we have teams for backend, frontend, and so on. So my frontend team consists of 7 people, I think, but the whole team consists of around 25 persons.
Great, fantastic. And looking at what were some specific results, productivity, what KPIs or metrics were you tracked on to improve this?
Interesting questions, because I haven't thought about it. But I think that the key measure is the time spent on beginning the task. We don't actually measure it, but I think this is the interesting one, because we can measure the time that you spend on just thinking what you need to actually do. And this is the time we need to shorten.
Oh, fantastic. Great. Thank you so much, Karolina, for that. Karolina's talk will be available on the website, and you can watch it for the moment on the LinkedIn live stream, as well as obviously the website. Thank you again, Karolina. It was a pleasure, and thanks for all the insights. Appreciate it. Bye for now. And that's it for another week of UXDX Community. All of our speakers put a phenomenal amount of thought into each session and how it relates to you. If there's anything that you want covered, please reach out to us on our website. We have a chat on the right-hand side. We're always open to feedback and what you want to hear from, because these events are built around helping product teams, helping people in their career. Likewise, you may have somebody that you really want to hear speak and you haven't had the opportunity, or a specific company doing great things. Please write to us and suggest some speakers that you might really love to hear from on the agenda, and it's something that we will connect with them as well. That is it for today. Thank you very much. Appreciate all your time, and we will be with you again next week. Bye for now.